think that might be it. Do you see us?
Yep.
We're on?
Yep.
All right, later, buddy.
Cool. Thanks, guys.
Yep.
Sorry. I'm just
So
trying to
you
decipher
going to help intro a little bit?
Yeah,
Let people know
so-
what's going on.
Hey everyone. Typically when we come on and we do these lives, we hang and chat with you guys and we answer a bunch of questions about our relationship, and as much as we really love doing that and enjoy doing that, just with everything that's going on right now in our country, it just didn't feel right to get on here and just chat about our relationship. So what we're going to do today is we are actually going to bring on a friend of ours. Her name is Angela Rye, and she's an amazing woman. She's an activist and a leader in the Black community, and we're gonna FaceTime her in, and she's going to we're gonna just talk. We're going to just listen to what she has to say. I know that both of us really are open to learning. We want to keep learning. We want to keep listening. We want to keep supporting. So we're gonna get her on here, and hopefully you guys will just open your hearts and open your ears and just really listen to what she has to say, and we can all learn something from this. So give us 1 second. I'm gonna get her on here, and then
Well said.
get started.
Well said.
Just waiting for her to call in.
Hey, thank you guys for tuning in.
Yeah.
You guys don't have to be here. We're grateful that you want to tune in and be a part of our journey, and we really appreciate it.
Yeah, we've actually also really enjoyed
Interactions.
these interactions. This is actually our last video. Our last live with you guys, but we've really enjoyed
For a little while.
For a little while, at least, yeah. Sorry, 1 second. Just trying to get her.
There she is.
Here she is. Hi.
Hi.
How are you?
Here we go.
Good.
We're
How are you?
gonna
I'm
move
gonna
this
put this
so
here.
we can all see each other.
See.
There we go. And get her in here. There we
There it
go.
is.
Beautiful, beautiful,
Turn it
beautiful.
this way a little bit more.
This is
Shift it.
this way.
No, twist it that way.
This way.
Yeah,
Boom.
So she's front and center.
There we go. Alrighty.
Hi, Angela.
Hi, you
How are
guys.
you?
Thank you so much for coming and speaking with us. We're so grateful to have you.
Thank you. Thank you. It's a pleasure. I know for you all, it's a courageous step, and I'll tell you, Haley, you said, how are you doing? I'm exhausted. It has been a long day, and I think, especially for this week, for so many of us, we're reliving so many of the things that we've seen once before. So to lose someone this week named George Floyd, who died saying, "I can't breathe," like Eric Garner did, is immensely frustrating. And just a few weeks, or just a couple of weeks ago, people learned about Ahmaud Arbery, who died jogging in his neighborhood. And of course, that was in February, but people just found out about it. Died like Trayvon Martin did in his neighborhood with the hoodie on, just walking 7-Eleven. And so there are so many more. Breonna Taylor, we don't often talk about Black women who died due to police violence or vigilante violence. But there are so many more who we don't know about because they didn't go viral, because there wasn't a video, because there wasn't an influencer talking about their death. And so I think that this is so important for us to learn how to stand in solidarity, because you all know, as we're talking right now, there are uprisings in Atlanta and in the DC area and in Denver, and of course in Minneapolis, where this has all happened. So It's a lot going on. I don't know if I said, do I need to say my name? I'm Angela Rye. I don't know if you all said that before I came on. So, but I'm so glad to be sitting with you all to try to figure out how we come up with solutions, right, to really lift up the work of the people doing this every day on the ground and trying to make life better for all of us.
I love that. And like you said, Haley and I mean, we want to do is whatever we can to learn and to know just what we can do. Is there anything any suggestions to people like Haley and I?
Yeah, and I think a really good place to start, just for full disclosure, we talked a little bit on the phone earlier, and what I thought was a good conversation. And one of the things that I was saying is, this is one of those moments where you don't necessarily want to talk about, you know, what it's like being Black or what it's like to be profiled or any of those things. But what is inspiring to me is being able to talk about, you know, what white privilege is, what allyship looks like, what it means to stand in solidarity. Because the reality of it is, so many of us have protested, have tweeted, have posted, have recorded videos that we hope would prick the conscience of a nation, and that hasn't worked, because if it did, we wouldn't be here today. And so we do need to rely on folks like you who are like, okay, I want to learn, what do I need to do? And so one of the things I would ask you all is, when you think about white privilege, which I think is really the foundation of this, what do you all think white privilege is from your vantage points? And there is no wrong answer, and nobody's going to get shamed for not knowing, because I think, again, this is a learning exercise, which means it's a safe space. So what do you all think white privilege is?
You want to start? You want to start?
I mean, obviously, I think from what I know and what I've seen is, first and foremost, just people getting treated differently, getting ahead of other people faster because of the color of their skin, because they're white. I don't know if that makes sense or if that's at all correct to say that, you know, it's very obvious and blatant that, you know, even when you're traveling in airports, in different places, I feel like people get, what's the word? Like they get profiled. Yes, exactly. I feel like it's so obvious when people get profiled, and then, you know, it's just, to me, it's really blatant, and I know it probably goes way deeper than that, and that's why I think this conversation is so important, so that I could ask you to also explain, like, it does just go beyond getting treated differently because of the color of your skin, or, you know, I made a post, I think it was yesterday, where I said, you even see it in the justice system, and when, you know, a white woman gets arrested, or, you know, a white teenager gets arrested, they don't have to fear for their life, ever.
Right.
You know, like, I would not fear for my life getting pulled over. But I know that so many Black women and men and teenagers and children would be scared to death to get pulled over. And that's so wrong, and it's just, you know, I just, you know, again, I want to understand more, and I think there's a thing too where it's like people get nervous to say the wrong thing, and I think this conversation is so healthy because, like you said, it's not about saying the wrong thing. It's about, even if we do say the wrong thing, getting corrected in love and respect, and saying, I'm telling you this because we respect each other and I want you to understand. So, you know, I never want to say the wrong thing or disrespect anybody, but that's why I believe we're having this conversation.
Absolutely. I don't like saying the wrong thing either. I think it comes from being a perfectionist. But I definitely don't like to say the wrong thing. But again, I hope that you all feel that I'm saying it's a safe space. And I don't know what the path forward is if we can't create these spaces where it's safe for me to express my anger, my frustration, safe for me to also teach and correct in love, but also safe for y'all to say, this is what I understand it to be. It might be wrong. It might be right. And we can go from there. But Haley, I would say what you said is exactly what it is.
Yeah.
Right? And it shows up in a lot of different ways. And Justin, I don't know if you have something to add to that. But we can talk about that for a second too from your perspective.
Yeah, I just think I've never had to worry about fearing my life because of the color of my skin. And I've noticed that, I've been treated differently because I've never experienced being treated negatively because of the color of my skin ever. Not one time.
Mm-hmm. And white privilege, I think what is important to understand too is it's systemic. This country was founded on white privilege and white supremacy. It was founded on white people as being better than, greater than, knowing that they are superior to, at least from the framers' minds, anybody else. That is why people could come in, colonize, and steal land from indigenous people and really cause a genocide of indigenous people in this country. And then in addition to that, not only was there a genocide of indigenous people in this country and are stealing of their land, of course, black people were brought over here on slave ships, right? So brought in as what they call chattel property on slave ships. And from the very beginning, deemed as 3/5. Y'all can do fractions. I'm not great at math, but 3/5, not 5/5, 3/5 human being. So not even completely human, simply property. And so what you have in this country now are people who generationally have been taught in a superiority, with the superiority complex, have been taught that they are privileged because they are better than, have been taught that black people are inferior and therefore less than any person of color. And of course, there's a spectrum. And so what I think makes it increasingly more difficult, I do, when I do speeches sometimes with young people, I ask them how many of them are afraid of the police. And most often when it's a room full of black folks, all the hands go up. And just like you said, Haley, and you said, Justin, when it's an integrated room, a lot of white folks' hands don't go up. What people don't understand is that fear is literally imprinted on our DNA.
Yeah.
Like it really is, because the very beginning of law enforcement in this country was to capture fugitive slaves and return them to their masters.
Wow.
Right? So that was what police were for. That is exactly, so that you have to understand that with that mentality, as someone goes on to be in law enforcement, the system in law enforcement, so we're not talking about individual police being good or bad, the system was designed to capture fugitive slaves, which means inherently that person is wrong. Inherently, this person belongs to something else, and as a result, I'm going to treat them as such. So that's really the basis of profiling. Black people are inherently dangerous, criminal, and violent is the mentality. And that's how people are operating. And that is why, even when it wasn't a violent crime, people are, they shoot to kill. It is why laws like Stand Your Ground, which is what Trayvon's killer relied upon, that says, I'm going to protect my space when I feel unsafe. But we know that a feeling of being unsafe is a subjective feeling, meaning it's based on our experience. It's based on our biases. It's based on our prejudice, right? So those are the kinds of ideologies and the kinds of supremacy and the kinds of racism that we combat every single day. And it's heavy and it's a lot. And so when moments like this happen, with George Floyd, what we're thinking is like, how many more have to die? How many more hashtags? How many times do we have to say Black Lives Matter? And you all may have paid attention to this, but when Black Lives Matter started, which was right after the death of Trayvon, people would respond, White Lives Matter, Black Lives Matter, All Lives Matter, Black Lives Matter, Blue Lives Matter. It had to be everybody else's life as if it was an argument, right? There shouldn't be any argument, but the argument comes from the idea that Black people are inferior, and it's inherent, right? It's even if you have a blind spot, you may see someone who you're like, oh, they look dangerous, and there have been hidden cameras for years where, like, you see a white woman walk across the street when a Black man came, right? Just walking towards her, like, oh, it clutched the purse, right? It's those kinds of biases that have to be shed, because that kind of bias, especially when you're in positions of power, can result in someone's physical harm.
Can I ask you something? Can I say something?
Please. Yes.
I was actually having a conversation the other day with a friend of mine, and I was saying, you know, I do think so much of, at least in my own experience, you know, is education. And when you're raising, you know, we're two white people, we're gonna have white children, you know, and I believe that it's also a lot about educating your kids as they grow up and explaining to them why, you know, explaining to them, you know, what's going on and being really honest with them. And I remember we were staying with a friend of ours who is a pastor. He pastors a church, and he's his whole family, he's a white man and his kids are white. And remember when we were at Carl's and we all watched that movie together, Star. And at the end, I remember his kids were all in tears. Everyone was crying, and he sat them down for like 45 minutes and explained to them, you know, this is why we stand up for people. This is why we support them. This is why. And I thought that that was such a valuable moment, especially seeing a father teach their kids like that, because I can never remember a time, to be honest, where my parents ever sat me down and explained it to me like that. And I think that's so important as I get older and I understand things more and I'm learning so much more, that it has to start in your home. It has to start when you're a child, and it has to start understanding from, you know, when we're getting raised by our parents, we look up to them for everything. We learn everything from them. So what they don't teach us is what we don't learn. Would that be right to say?
I think that's absolutely right. And I think, you know, while we're talking about privilege, there's white privilege, but there's also layers of privilege for other people. I'm privileged because I was raised in a 2-parent household. I'm privileged because my parents taught me from the beginning that history books were going to lie to me about my culture. That they were going to start talking about slavery. There's going to be a paragraph this big, but let me tell you about the black kings and queens from the continent of Africa that you look like, that you be modeled after, that, you know, that did so much to advance global civilization. And I know that it was a point of privilege. I'm privileged because I was raised with a daddy with a bullhorn who had me at protests at 2, you know? and I think the greatest thing is, Haley and Justin, is I grew up with a father who taught me that if we don't stand in solidarity with other people who are struggling, we are failing the people. Right? So it wasn't always just about our struggle. It was about what was happening with other folks in our community. I'm from Seattle. And you just learn that over time. It doesn't take anything away from you to stand up for someone else, right? You learn that, hopefully you learn that at home too, about when you see somebody getting bullied. You know? And that's the other thing that I really thought we should dive into, which is like what allyship is, what solidarity is, and what it means to stand alongside your friends who are experiencing this in a real way because they're black right now, right? So if we can, for a second, talk about what we think allyship is, I think that's an important, not really a pivot point, but I think the next layer of this. When you hear the word ally, what does ally mean to you?
Someone who's on your side.
Well, you made that plain. I think you don't have to. It really is, but it's someone who's by your side. How, right? And I think that how matters. It is someone who is engaging with you. It's not someone who will just retweet. It's not someone that's just like, back in the day, I'm older than y'all. So back in the day, some politicians would get on there and say, "I feel your pain," right? It's someone who really works toward empathy and trying to put themselves in your shoes. My mom says so much, probably because I haven't learned it yet, but she says all the time, Angela, the greatest skill in life you can gain is perspective taking. And that means to literally take yourself out of what you think is right, what you think is the path, and say, how does this person see it if I put myself in their shoes? It's so important as an ally to be informed. Like, you can't step out there and be in front of a movement you don't understand. You can't step out there and be shoulder to shoulder with someone when you haven't understood, you know, why they may be triggered by this incident? You know, what have they personally experienced? Why does it bother them so much? Are they afraid of the police, and why? What experiences have they personally encountered? And once you do some of that, just some of that listening, then you can be an informed ally.
Yeah.
You know, you're a witness then to the problem.
Yeah.
And if you look at history, especially in this country, there have always been white allies to black movements.
Yeah.
Sometimes they led. If you think about John Brown, sometimes they just stood alongside them. There were several rabbis in the Jewish community that stood by Dr. King, you know?
Yeah.
And so I think that's the other really important piece of this. Allyship doesn't necessarily mean you're out front, but it does mean you're alongside Justin. I think it's such a powerful way to say that.
Yeah.
So when you all think about your roles right now, what do you feel like, okay, this is what I'm kind of feeling like I should be doing, I should be called to do?
To be honest, I think the first thing that always for me is I want to support, but I think that a lot of times when something like this happens, it's always a matter of like, what more can I do? How can I be like louder about this? How can I do more? What is the, you know, and I think that doing what we're doing right now is one of the biggest ways to say, you know, like, you know, when we were on the phone, even before we did this, it's like, educate me, like tell me how can I help you in this time? Like, just tell me how to be there for you, and tell me how to like stand there and hold your hand and be there and have your back, and like you said, be an ally, stand there with you, and like what does that look like, and you know, what is the best way to do that? Because I also think we're two people who have really big platforms, and as much as we can Instagram and tweet and do all of those things, sometimes it's much bigger than that, and it's a bigger conversation than that, and you know. Because
yes, we can post the phone numbers and stuff, but
yeah,
I also want to just be able to.
We have a cat. Our cat is on the counter. We had a knife.
I see the cat. They don't see the cat, but I see.
Yeah,
we had a knife.
They're going crazy.
Oh, that was a knife. I was like, why is Justin flashing the light? He's like, who do I need to cut for this?
Right.
No. The cat was gonna start playing with the knife, so we were like, oh god, we gotta move it. But what I was saying is, you know, this just happens too often to just Instagram or just tweet or just post the phone number. And
sorry, I was just gonna say, because I felt like almost I've been feeling shame in the sense of like, why did it take these men being killed for me to almost like take a blanket over my eyes and be like why now? And I gotta say, I do feel bad when it comes to that.
And I would agree with that. I would say that there's definitely been a lot of times where, and we've talked about this between the two of us as, you know, husband and wife, where we've been really ignorant to a lot of things, and we've said ignorant things, and we've just really not understood. And that's why I'm so grateful, first of all, for you even doing this and having this conversation with us, because we don't know what we don't know, and we can't change what we're ignorant to. So I just wanted to say thank you for even doing this.
Yeah, and thank you.
I'm loving having this discussion and this conversation, because I think it's really powerful.
I want to say thank you to you all for being open to it, because again, I know it's not comfortable. Like there are spaces that you all occupy that are more in your comfort zone, and this is one of those things. Just you just talk about the blanket being pulled off of your eyes, and I think it is important to take a moment and sit with that. What was different about this time for y'all? And just like, don't worry about the guilt of not having done it before, because we still have to move forward, right? We can say, oh, I apologize for every time somebody tried to call my attention to this and I didn't step up. I'm sorry. I'm in the game now, coach. What do I got to do, right? Yeah. And so I think the question I have for you is really, what was different about this time?
I think just the blatancy of it, just how blatant it is. I think sometimes for us as humans in general, things are like, we're all going through our unique struggles in life, you know? I think sometimes it's out of sight, out of mind, I think, for me. And having white privilege, it's just not something I deal with as an individual. So it's just out of sight, out of mind. And so when these things are happening, and they're at the forefront, and I'm swiping through Instagram and I'm seeing it. It's like it's so prevalent and it's so in your face that there's no denying that this is the reality. And that's pretty much why I
totally
think.
agree. I think also, I had a conversation one time with a friend of mine, and she is a white woman. And sorry, our cats are just being rude.
I can see the cats about
Relax.
They're right over there.
I had a conversation with a friend, I remember, and I'll never forget this conversation because I thought it was so valuable. And she said, well, I do feel like it was between me and another friend of mine who was white and another friend of ours who was a black woman. And she said to me, to be fair, I do think we have come a really long way from the days of segregated, church or movie theaters or things like that. And I was like, but have we come a long way? And she said, well, we've had a black president. And I was like, yeah, but what's right in front of us is that people in the black community are blatantly being treated differently and they're losing their lives. So have we really come that far? Because the fact is that this happened probably a year ago, is that it's 2020 and this is still happening, and you're comparing something from, like, we should be so far advanced and it still feels like it's...
Would that be an ignorant question to ask of, like, is it at all better? Is it worse? Is it the same?
I think that it's better, but I think it's, I talk about incrementalism a lot, in that incremental change is not the same as a massive change, right? So what you'll hear overwhelmingly are people, I've been in politics a long time, my career's been in politics, you'll hear people that celebrate, like, the 1964 Civil Rights Act, the 1965 Voting Rights Act, the 1968 Fair Housing Act as the most monumental pieces of legislation for black people. Y'all, how long ago was that? Right? And so it's like, those are the biggest shifts. And then the Supreme Court gutted the Voting Rights Act in 2014. Was it 2013 or 2014? I think it was 2014. Maybe it was 2013. Either way, a few years ago, and it still hasn't been corrected. So what you see are like politicians that kind of hedge, like, I can't do anything that's too black. If I do something that's too black, I'm going to lose my white voters. Why is that the case? Why is that the case? It should not be, it should be a false choice that if you do something for black people, you will lose white voters. It should be that white voters see the importance. Isn't that right?
Is that's the reality?
Yeah. That is the reality. And part of it is this cyclical effect, right? So there's this I'm going to do what I need to do to get white voters, but I'm going to leave black people behind. And so they're not even sure now if that's the case. But they've told themselves that for so long that that's what they're doing. And so as the time goes by from those, the 1960s movement that was really led by Dr. King and Bayard Rustin and Reverend Shuttlesworth and all of these amazing people, Diane Nash, the truth of it is we haven't even seen it because we won't even try. So there are things that can happen politically, legislatively, to change so many of these things at the state level, at the city level, at the county level, and of course at the federal level. And those are the places where I feel allyship could be a lot stronger. Challenging members of Congress who are going to be blown away by y'all's platforms, saying, no, there are actually some things that need to happen so black people can survive in this country. It shouldn't just be that we're asking for ways to ensure that people can live. It should be that they would be able to live abundant lives. But right now we're just at survival.
Just survival.
Right? And so that is the thing. So
we also, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. I was just going to say, we live in a country that talks a big game about being land of the free. And,
it's just not
it's
true.
just not true. It's just not true. For
that was
so
a promise
many
made for some, but not all. When we talk about, even in the Declaration of Independence, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, we did not come here with liberty and have yet to arrive to liberty. We came just barely alive and have yet to find abundant life. We're not allowed to pursue happiness because we're just trying to make sure that we can make it to the next day. The talks that we have to have with our children and the talks around the kitchen table or the dinner table are so exhausting.
Yeah.
It's just about, what parents have to tell their kids. If you get pulled over by the police, keep both hands on the steering wheel. Don't talk back. State your name. Say if you need to reach for something. Like, it's that serious.
Yeah.
It's that serious. And so that's really the thing that what we should be talking about is, why is it so easy for white people to stand with the gay community, to stand with pets, right? To stand up for pets. I can't remember who died around Cecil the lion, but there was more outrage for Cecil the lion than the black person that got killed around it. I wish to God I could think about it. I'll look at my phone really quick. And then for women, we can stand with women around Me Too, and we should, and around pay disparity, and we should. But why, when it comes to black people, it's like, okay, I'm uncomfortable. I'm uncomfortable. I can't talk about that. You know how to stand up for everything else.
Yeah.
Right?
That's true.
There was a video
That
I
is
saw today, and I would love to quickly just get his name because I want to say the right thing. Where he talked a lot about, unlearning. It starts with unlearning, and I loved that. Let me just grab his name really quick because I'd love to give him.
While you're doing that, I'm looking up Cecil the lion and who died around that, because I'm like, who was the person?
Dang.
It was astounding. And then for us, it's enraging. It's like, wow, you care more. Not that you shouldn't care about Cecil the lion, but like, what is going on?
And so, what is?
Yeah, it was a black man killed by the University of Cincinnati police right around the same time.
And the reality is that it's because we live in a society and a world that is racist. That's why.
Yeah. The guy who I was talking about is Brandon Goodman.
Okay.
And he posted a video today that I came across that I thought was really powerful, where he was talking a lot about unlearning, and I think that's so true. I think that there is so much unlearning to do.
Yeah.
I think, but racism is a heart thing, and as I don't know if you know, but Haley and I are both Christians. We believe in the love of Jesus, and I truly believe that the love of Jesus is really what's going to change hearts. Because racism
I don't know if you
is
read what you sent me earlier, but I think that had a lot to do with actually what you're kind of talking about. And do you mind would you actually read what you sent me?
Yeah, I'll read it. Justin, finish your point, and then I'll read it. Can we do that? Hey?
Yeah, I was just going to say that racism is a hard issue, and Jesus is a redeemer, and he can redeem those thoughts, those feelings of racism. And so I would just encourage people to, take a look at your soul and your spirit, and I think that's where it starts, to be honest. So, but what were you going to show us?
I'm going to read you that, but I want to respond to that too, because I think it's something that you can take with you. Prejudice and implicit bias are the heart issues, right? So every one of us can have that. What's different about racism is the power behind the prejudice. So I can't be racist because I don't have institutional power to hold you back. I can't be prejudiced. I can be discriminatory in my practices, right? Okay. But racism is about the power to be able to use discriminatory intent or impact to keep somebody else down.
Okay.
And when we talk about systemic racism and systemic oppression, that's what that is.
Okay.
So not that one is better than the other, but one has more power and can do a lot more harm. Yeah. And that is the reason why we keep seeing these police killings. It is an institutional problem. That's why a black police officer, for example, can be a part of systemic racism because it's the institution. It's not that individual actor, if that makes sense. So this was, I sent you all this devotional from, he's actually a priest named Richard Rohr. who's on with Oprah a lot. And I love his stuff because I always say I believe in a social justice gospel, because I believe like the Bible that folks read to use it to oppress other people, I don't read that Bible. I don't know what God they're serving where that works. So Richard Rohr is like about that life. Like this is a white dude who regularly is like, oh, my platform, there's a dope woman, a black woman that y'all need to hear from. She's doing this email today. So he knows like how to democratize the platform to give access to other voices who ordinarily wouldn't have it. So this is called Invitation to Solidarity. It looks longer than it is. But he says, throughout human history, countless people have been poor, vulnerable, or oppressed in some way. Those holding positions of authority within systems of power secure their own privilege, comfort, and wealth, almost always at the expense of those most on the margins. Much of history has been recorded to hide this fact and instead celebrates the so-called winners. I call this systemic reality a form of sin, or what the Apostle Paul describes as the world. So worldly for all the church folks out there. This type of corporate evil is often culturally agreed upon, admired, and deemed necessary, as is normally the case when a country goes to war, spends most of its budget on armaments, those are weapons in case people don't know, admires luxuries over necessities, entertains itself to death, or pollutes its common water and air. The hidden nature of systemic oppression, we just talked about that, makes it all the more remarkable that the revelation of God in the Bible is written from the perspective of the oppressed. The Bible reveals a liberating path of humility, compassion, and nonviolence in the face of oppression that culminates in the life, ministry, and state-sponsored execution of Jesus. We see in the Gospels that the people who tend to follow Jesus are the ones on the margins. The lame, poor, blind, prostitutes, drunkards, tax collectors, and foreigners. He lived in close proximity to and in solidarity with the excluded ones in society. Those on the inside and at the center of power are the ones who crucify him. Elders, chief priests, teachers of the law, scribes, and Roman occupiers. Yet, we still honor people in these latter roles and shun the ones in the former. For the first 300 years after Jesus' death, Christians were the oppressed minority. But by the year 400 CE, Christians had changed places. We moved from hiding in the catacombs to presiding in the basilicas. That is when we started reading the Bible, not as subversive literature, the story of the oppressed, but as establishment literature to justify the status quo of people in power. When Christians began to gain positions of power and privilege, they also began to ignore segments of Scripture, especially the Sermon on the Mount. Our position in society determines what we pay attention to and what systems we are willing to go along with. This is what allowed Christian, he put in quotations here too, Christian empires throughout history to brutalize and oppress others in the name of God. Sadly, this is still the case today. But when the Bible is read through the eyes of solidarity, what we call the preferential option for the poor or the bias from the margins, it will always be liberating, transformative, and empowering in a completely different way. Read this way. Let me try it again. Read this way, Scripture cannot be used by those with power to oppress or impress. The question is no longer, how can I maintain my special and secure status? It is, how can we all grow and change together? I think the acceptance of that invitation to solidarity with the larger pain of the world is what it means to be a Christian.
Wow.
Do you all know how many people I forwarded to? And this was before we learned about George Floyd, like just the eerie timing of that. When I was like, oh my God, I have this new like revolutionary way of looking at solidarity, you know? And again, like we talked at the beginning about privilege on a scale. I'm privileged to a degree. It's different from you all's privilege, but I still need to be using the space that I occupy to empower, to create space for, to serve people who live on the margins.
Wow.
Right? That's just what it is. So.
I love that what you
That's
said
great.
earlier, and I read it earlier too, and I thought it was really powerful.
So
People
good.
want to
I
follow.
wish they were my words.
People want to follow Jesus where they want to go, but not everywhere Jesus went. And Jesus
Every
went to
time.
the marginalized. And
Yeah, we were just our pastor. We belong to a church called Church Home, and it's pastored by Judah Smith.
Mm-hmm.
And he actually had a message on Wednesday about when Jesus went to the well, when there was a woman there that went at noon because she knew no one would be there because she was, you know, an outcast, and
she's Samaritan.
yeah, she was a Samaritan. So in the Bible, Jews and Samaritans did not interact, and they didn't get along. So I just love the perspective of that, where, you know, Jesus was in there. He was at the well with the people that nobody wanted to be there with, and nobody wanted to interact with. And I love that, and I cling to that, and I hold on to that, and, you know, it really impacted.
It was
me.
important to Jesus.
Yeah.
It was important to Jesus for him to make that, to stand with people.
Yeah.
With the forgotten, with the
forgotten.
jail, with the, you know, with everyone who we so readily walk by and are like the folks who are treated as invisible. The folks who would declare Black Lives Matter are the people who he would be marching with,
Exactly.
you know, or feeding or working with, or figuring out how he can lift up. And I think that's just it.
There are a lot of churches who aren't speaking up, and they're and I don't think that's okay.
Yeah. Because they don't want to lose their congregation, and they don't want people to leave.
They don't want to
church,
ruffle feathers, or I don't know.
Haley, say that again, because that's why the laws haven't changed. They don't want what?
They don't want people to leave their church.
Yeah.
So they don't want to lose the vote. So see what I'm saying? So it's power. They think that power begets power only if you continue to devalue the marginalized and the oppressed, and like that cycle has to be broken.
And it just perpetuates. It just
That's
keeps pushing it, and this is why. Like when I asked you earlier about how far we've come, it's like, we have, but the cycle is still continuously being perpetuated.
That's right.
So I wanted to ask too, you know, like, I don't know if we've really heard from you yet. Like, when I say to you and when I ask you, what is the best thing for us to do in a time like this, when a tragedy like this happens, which has happened multiple times and happens far too often, like what is the best thing for us to do with a platform like we have as a white woman and a white man? Like, how can we, what is the best way to support and be an ally and to stand with you? Like, what can we do?
I think one of the first things that I want to encourage you all to do, there's a book by Ibrahim Kendi. I want to make sure I'm saying his name right. That's called Ibram Kendi. That's called How to Be Anti-Racist. And the book is so good because it stretches how to be an anti-racist stretches all of us, right, to do and be our best selves and to learn. There is another book by the name of the author is Ijeoma Oluwo, and I just had her on my podcast. And she has a book that's about Let's Talk About Racism. So I think the reading piece is important. There are other actions that you can do as well, but I wanted to get to talk about that learning portion that Justin brought up earlier, because that's also crucial. There are several organizations on the ground, not just in Minnesota, but in other places doing this work, and there are a few I want to lift up. There's an organization called Color of Change on my page right now. I have their demands on my page. I think it would be incredible for you all to share those demands.
Yeah, I would love to.
Just talking about what we can do to address police violence for Black people. There's another organization called Campaign Zero that also works to address police brutality. And then there's another organization called Black Futures Lab. And they have something called Black to the Future, which is their sister organization that has an overall Black agenda that doesn't just address police violence, doesn't just address criminal justice reform. They address healthcare and education and what am I missing? Economics. And this agenda is one where they're pushing people to sign on to that. And I think one key step is for people to stop seeing Black agenda and Black agenda and Black politics as uniquely for Black people. Allies need to stand with us holistically, like all together. So that's another thing. People can sign on to that petition there. And then there are protesters on the ground in Minnesota who are doing work every single day in this space, who could probably benefit from this support. And it's not unique for entertainers or those with platforms and profiles to support the movement. It's been done since the Civil Rights Movement. Mr. Belafonte and Dick Gregory and others were supporting Dr. King and some other folks. Ossie Davis and Ruby Dee. Like, we're doing that for years. And there were white entertainers who were doing that. I think the difference is that this moment requires your public support of those movements and not just a quiet donation, you know? And I think encouraging your supporters to know and your fans to know that you can also donate small things to these folks because they're doing this work on shoestring budgets and can use that kind of support. I think the last thing I would say specifically to you, Justin, there's so many people in my culture, in my race, that love you, right? It feels like, you know, you're kind of one of them, right? Or one of us in some ways because of, like, you know, the soulful way in which you engage in your music. And so I think because of that, knowing that in some ways there's some aspects of Black culture that you benefit from, that you pay it forward, or that's recycled back into the community in the ways that I discussed. I think that's super important because otherwise people can attack from a standpoint of like, that's cultural appropriation. But what you're saying is, no, this is really authentically who I am, but because this is authentically who I am and I empathize with y'all, I'm not ever going to leave you. So it's a different type of dedication, and it's a reciprocal relationship that doesn't always exist in our politics, but should, right? And so I think that could also be true for entertainment, not just for you, but I think maybe starting with you, maybe you could start something.
Thank you. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I think that again, I just want to say thank you so much. I just checked the time and we have a minute left on the live, but what an awesome conversation. I honestly, like, I would love to get on the phone with you more and, you know, just continue to grow a relationship with you and get to know you better, just because I love to learn about what's going on, and I love to know as much as I can and know how I can help and know how I can support, because you know, I love people. It hurts me to see this happening, and I say that with full sincerity, and I just want to continue to know what to do. And I think that there's been times in my life, for most of my life, where I felt like maybe scared to ask the questions or scared to ask because I didn't want to come off as ignorant, and I didn't want to say, again, I didn't want to say the wrong thing. But I think there's power in asking questions, and I think there's power in being open.
Uncomfortable.
And
there's
uncomfortable,
growth in uncomfortability, you know?
Absolutely.
Like, people don't want to be uncomfortable. They don't want to get out of their own routine, their own way of life, their own way of thinking, you know? And you talked about unlearning, you know, and I think it starts with being uncomfortable and saying, I don't know, please help me, give me answers, help me to help, because that's your heart. And
I think trying to pretend to know is also being ignorant, because you know, there's so many people that I think do that. I think I've been guilty of that before, where, you know, you want to sound smart, you want to sound educated without really knowing the facts or really knowing what something is or where it comes from or its history, and that's ignorant. That's definitely ignorant. So I just appreciate you so much for even taking the time to do this with the both of us and with the people watching. And, you know, I hope we can do stuff like this more, because I think it's awesome and it's really powerful, and I just have a lot of admiration for you. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And I have a whole crew of friends that know this and can do this, and I'm happy to talk to y'all anytime. I think it matters when we talk about how we shift. I know you talked about unlearning. I always like to use the analogy of what happens when your phone freezes and you have this moment where, you know, you try to reset it, and if that doesn't work, then you have to do a hard reset, right? You have to, like, really course correct. And I think we're at this really important moment where we can choose to do that. We say, look, I don't know everything, but I can show you my perspective. I can tell you what I do know, and hopefully together we can grow. And I think you are willing to say, I don't know how to fully be an ally yet, but I'm absolutely willing to learn.
Yeah.
I'm absolutely willing to use my platform to share resources with people about who's out there doing the work and lifting up those organizations. That's a hell of a start, y'all. It really is. It's a big thing. And so I think that's what it is. And you even being able to say, look, I'm sorry, I was ignorant for a long time. I turned a blind eye for a long time, but not anymore.
Yeah.
Well, we serve a redemptive God, and so here we are, course correcting, and we'll move in a better direction. So, I think we're out.
Well, thank you so much for doing this, and we'll keep in touch. I mean, let's do it again sometime.
Okay, you guys take care, and please keep the cats away from the knives.
I know, I'm so sorry. That was like the weirdest moment of this whole thing. Was like Justin just pulls a knife out of nowhere, and you're
What's
like,
happening?
"Are we okay?"
Well,
he was fine. He was fine. I just want to make sure they know it was the cats, not just he wasn't issuing any threats, right?
no threats.
No
No threats on this side. Well, we're so grateful.
Thank you so
Take care.
much. We'll talk to you
Bye,
soon.
guys.
Take care.
Absolutely. Okay, bye-bye.